stop scrolling for a second. What if I told you one of Seiko's most beautiful Presage watches isn't a cocktail time, and it's actually nicknamed after coffee? No, seriously, meet the Seiko Espresso. And by the end of this video, I'll tell you why this hidden gem almost didn't make it into my collection. When people hear the words Seiko Presage, the first thing that usually comes to mind is the Cocktail Time collection. Those colorful dials inspired by famous Japanese cocktails have become incredibly popular over the years, and rightly so. But because everyone talks about the Cocktail Time, another Presage quietly slipped under the radar. Sitting quietly in the background is the Seiko SARY136 in Japan, or the SSA392J1 everywhere else in the world. Among collectors, it's affectionately known as the espresso, and honestly, once you see it in person, you'll understand exactly why. This isn't just another brown dial. It's the rich color of a freshly pulled espresso shot. Warm, deep, sophisticated, and somehow comforting every time you look at it. And believe me, this watch deserves far more attention than it's getting. The very first thing that steals the show is that incredible fumé dial. Depending on the lighting, it constantly changes character. Under direct sunlight, you start seeing warm copper and caramel tones. Indoors, it becomes rich chocolate brown. And in darker environments, it almost looks black. It's one of those watches that never looks exactly the same twice. Every glance at your wrist becomes a different experience. Honestly, I probably spend more time rotating my wrist just to watch the dial change than actually checking what time it is. My wife probably thinks I'm secretly texting someone. Nope. I'm just admiring coffee on my wrist. As someone who enjoys a good cup of coffee, I think Seiko absolutely nailed the nickname. Wearing this watch feels like sitting in your favorite cafe on a quiet morning with a fresh espresso beside you. Now here's where things get even better. Because this isn't just a beautiful dial. Seiko somehow managed to include useful complications without making the watch feel cluttered. Between the 9 and 11 o'clock positions sits the power reserve indicator. Normally, I'm not the biggest fan of power reserve displays because some manufacturers seem to stick them wherever there's empty space, and the result looks like an airplane dashboard. Thankfully, Seiko exercised some restraint here. The indicator blends naturally into the dial and actually complements the overall design. It's useful too, especially if you're like me and rotate through several watches every week. I tell myself that's called collecting. My bank account insists it's called making poor financial decisions. Then we move down to 6 o'clock, where you'll find one of my favorite design elements on this watch, the pointer date. Instead of cutting a square date window into that gorgeous espresso dial, Seiko created a recessed circular date display with a delicate gold hand pointing toward the current date. It's elegant, different, and adds another layer of visual depth to the dial. Combined with the beautifully applied gold indices and sharp Dauphine hands, the watch catches light from every angle. Every polished surface sparkles just enough without becoming distracting. Even the seconds hand has a nicely balanced counterweight that shows just how much attention Seiko paid to the little details. Nothing here feels random. Everything feels intentional. But here's something that surprised me once I actually wore it. The specifications don't tell the whole story. On paper, the watch measures about 41 millimeters across, around 14 millimeters thick, because of that beautifully domed hardlex crystal, with a lug-to-lug measurement of roughly 48 millimeters and a standard 20 millimeter lug width. I already know some of you are typing, 14 millimeters? That's way too thick. But trust me, don't judge this watch by the numbers alone. The lugs curve downward beautifully, allowing the watch to wrap comfortably around the wrist, while the polished case sides taper elegantly. Much of that thickness comes from the domed crystal rather than the actual case. On my 6.5-inch wrist, it wears noticeably slimmer than the specifications would suggest. It's another reminder that sometimes spec sheets can be misleading. Your wrist tells the real story. Speaking of the case, let's talk about that gold tone finish. I'll be honest with you. Gold tone watches usually make me nervous because they can easily cross the line into looking flashy. That was actually one of the reasons I hesitated before buying this watch. But once I saw it in person, my opinion completely changed. The rich espresso dial balances the warm gold case perfectly, creating a look that's elegant rather than loud. It doesn't scream for attention. Instead, it quietly draws people in. It has this timeless vintage character that reminds me of classic dress watches from decades ago. It's warm, refined, and incredibly tasteful. Every time I wear it, I end up craving coffee, which is probably the only downside of owning a watch called espresso. Powering everything is Seiko's dependable 4R57 automatic movement. It features hacking seconds, hand winding, approximately 41 hours of power reserve, and operates at 21,600 vibrations per hour. Through the exhibition case back, you can admire the movement whenever you take the watch off. Is it decorated like a Grand Seiko movement? Of course not, but it doesn't need to be. It's reliable, proven, relatively easy to service, and exactly the kind of movement you want in an everyday mechanical watch. Sometimes reliability is more exciting than fancy decoration, especially after you've received a service invoice from certain Swiss brands that costs almost as much as another Seiko. Now let's address something every Seiko fan has probably experienced at least once: the leather strap. Visually, it's excellent. The dark brown leather perfectly complements the warm tones of the espresso dial, and the contrasting stitching ties everything together beautifully. But it's also unmistakably a Seiko factory strap. In other words, it's a little stiff when it's brand new. Not terrible, just Seiko stiff. Thankfully, it softens over time. Of course, if you're anything like me, you've probably already started shopping for aftermarket straps before the watch even arrives. Dark brown suede looks fantastic. Tan leather completely changes the personality. Even burgundy shell cordovan makes this watch look spectacular. It's one of those watches that qualifies as a true strap monster. As for lume, well, let's just say this isn't the watch you're wearing during a zombie apocalypse. There's very little lume here, and honestly, that's perfectly fine. This isn't trying to be a dive watch. It's trying to be a sophisticated everyday dress watch, and in that role, it succeeds brilliantly. Here's where I think this watch becomes incredibly interesting: the value. Especially on today's pre-owned market, the SARY136 or SSA392J1 represents fantastic value. You're getting an absolutely stunning fumé dial, a power reserve complication, a pointer date, excellent finishing, a dependable automatic movement, and a design that stands out without trying too hard. Perhaps more importantly, you're wearing something that very few other people own. Sometimes the greatest luxury isn't owning the most popular watch, it's owning the one that nobody else discovered. Remember at the beginning when I mentioned there was one thing that almost stopped me from buying this watch? It was that gold tone case. I genuinely thought it might spend more time sitting inside my watch box than on my wrist. I couldn't have been more wrong. The espresso dial completely transforms the personality of the watch. Instead of looking flashy, it looks warm. Instead of shouting, it whispers. Instead of demanding attention, it quietly earns admiration. That's probably why I keep reaching for it whenever I want something different from the usual black, blue, or white dial. So, who is this watch really for? If this is your very first automatic watch, I'd probably recommend starting with something simpler. But if you've already collected a diver, a field watch, maybe a chronograph, and you're looking for something elegant with genuine personality, the Seiko SARY136, also known internationally as the SSA392J1, deserves a serious look. It's proof that Seiko's best watches aren't always the ones everyone is talking about. Sometimes the hidden gems remain hidden simply because everyone else is chasing the obvious choices. And maybe that's exactly what makes this one so special.